approach to business. Welcome, everybody!
To be hopeful in bad times is not just foolishly romantic. It is based on the fact that human history is a history of not only cruelty, but also compassion, sacrifice, courage, and kindness. If we remember those times and places where people have behaved magnificently, this gives us the energy to act, and at least the possibility of sending the spinning top of a world in a different direction. On Hopefulness, thoughts by historian and philosopher Howard Zinn. Welcome to Pollinating Purpose, a caring approach to business by Pillar Nonprofit Network. I am your host and Harley-Davidson cyclist, Miriam Willigi. I also act as the Vice President of Impact, Equity, and Governance here at Pillar. For those of you who are new here, Pollinating Purpose is a show all about supporting organizations who seek to create social good through their work. Whether a nonprofit, for-profit, or grassroots organization, you'll learn key considerations to starting or growing your social impact business in a long-term and sustainable way. Today, we'll be joined by the wonderfully thoughtful Ruth Skinner. Ruth is the current director of Forest City Gallery. She also works as an art organizer, publisher, and educator here in London. She's a sessional lecturer in the School for Advanced Studies in the Arts and Humanities, where she teaches about digital and media literacy, artist-run culture, and arts-driven advocacy. If you're unfamiliar, Forest City Gallery, or affectionately FCG, is an artist-run center founded on artistic advocacy. They program exhibitions and events that reflect current conversations related to art making and culture. In addition to exhibitions, they organize educational workshops for artists and art professionals, artist talks, and performances. FCG's exhibitions and programs represent artists of all disciplines and career levels, with a focus on emerging artists of all ages. FCG is a nonprofit and charity, and a membership-driven organization. I have the lovely pleasure of knowing Ruth both in and outside of work spheres, and sitting outside of FCG, just talking about the state of the sector with Ruth is always an opportunity to leave me with a feeling of camaraderie and hopefulness. Hi, Ruth.
Hi.
Thanks for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, anytime. I'm excited about this conversation. So before we kind of get into the meat and potatoes of it all, can you share a little bit about Forest City Gallery and what you folks do there?
Yes. Forest City Gallery is an artist-run center. We're the only artist-run center in London, and we're actually the only artist-run center between Hamilton and Windsor. And when people walk in, what I generally like to tell them is, artist-run centers are part of an ecosystem, which includes commercial art galleries, bigger institutions like a Museum London or AGO, and then smaller nonprofit spaces like ours, which rather than sell artwork, we are dedicated to paying artists fees, national fees set by an organization called CARFAC, to produce work. So we pay artists to produce exhibitions, we pay them for workshops and talks, and we also organize different programs, kind of ancillary programs like professionalization, skill set building. We do readings in between shows. We also host music shows at Forest City because we were founded by artists and musicians. So our whole mandate is to support artists, and we're part of an ecosystem. Commercial art galleries are really important. We like to see artists make their way into those spaces, but we definitely have our own kind of network that we float in.
Yeah, and I mean, well, you and I are part of the same community in many ways, which is lovely. And yeah, so many of the people that we know are artists, and so they seeing the ways in which Forest City Gallery is able to, create those workshops and opportunities to support artists in, really understanding how to create art as a career has been really wonderful to witness. Because yes, we need the beauty of art in order to survive in society, and also how can we support artists in being able to do that in a way that allows them to thrive themselves and not just create art that allows community to thrive.
Definitely.
Yeah.
We've been learning a lot lately about communicating our value not only to the arts and cultural sector, but to the economy. And so, we're a publicly funded organization, and our biggest expenses are our rent, the one part-time staff person, which is myself, and then we pay out artist fees. So we pay anywhere between $25,000 and $30,000 per year to artists and to support their exhibitions. And in a city like London, where possibilities for artists for paid work is really limited, that's really important. And one of our board members said, maybe we have to start speaking the language of venture capitalism, but we truly are investing in artists. And we're paying them to make work, and we're paying them to and live in our community. And our mandate is also, we focus on emerging artists in particular. When you're in a bigger city, you'll get multiple artist-run centers, so you might have one that focuses on media and video, one for performance. We cover all territory because we're the only one. We do focus on emerging artists, but that's an artist of any age. It's an artist who's newer to their practice and wants to become a full-time, maybe artist. So the majority of our community identifies as full-time artists.
Yeah, and that actually segues beautifully into my next question, which is, this first piece isn't really a question, but art and advocacy are really closely connected. And it can be difficult to know how to best advocate as a nonprofit in particular, because of those perceived risks and connections to funding. So how does Forest City navigate that? You mentioned, maybe we need to speak the language of venture capitalism, but how are you choosing to engage in that advocacy piece as an organization?
We're pretty fortunate. We're 50 years old this year, and a number of our founders are still very much engaged in our community. And from the beginning, we were an advocacy-driven organization. We were founded by activist artists. So Jamili Hassan, who's a local artist, is very vocal in so many different conversations, cultural conversations, political conversations. And so we have these mentors who are very much empowering us to articulate the concerns that we have and to feel like we are okay to do that. We do keep checking in to make sure that we're kind of positioning ourselves from where we're at. So we're an artist-run center. We have particular concerns when it comes to cultural issues and political issues, but we also want to ground that in a way that is realistic and meaningful, and where we can actually show like our concrete concerns. Because I think right now we're in a time where it's really easy to just get really overwhelmed and upset about any number of things. But if we can have a reasonable conversation, let's do it. And there are conversations and concerns right now about, if we say the wrong thing, are we at risk of funding? But luckily, we're all of our artist-run spaces in Ontario are talking to one another about these issues right now. And there is power in numbers. And when you can get together, when you can be in coalition with one another and say, these are across the board, generally like really important concerns, it feels a little less intense or intimidating.
Yeah, and this brings up a good point of, both being an artist-run center that caters or exists to support artists, as well as a membership-driven organization, that advocacy piece, I'm assuming, is guided by, the concerns and perspectives of that community that you exist within. How are you finding out, how are you hearing them? What are the ways in which you're finding that information from them of what do you want us to be focusing on?
Yeah, we're keeping the line of communication open. And I think especially after COVID, it was really important. We moved during COVID as well, and there was the risk that we were falling off people's radar. So in the last few years, we've made every effort to remind people that our doors are open. And, whether it's wanting to just come in and see an exhibition or wanting to come in to talk to myself or a board member, in confidence about your concerns, we're constantly reminding people of that. We check in with our members regularly. We have members-only newsletters. We also put out bulletins and alerts when things come up. And when members bring things to us, they're often saying, can you please share this with your membership? Our board's really hands-on, so we have those conversations as a board about, where do we put our attention? I have a really great sticky note from one of our board members right next to my desk. And it says, is this an art thing or is this a community thing? If it's a community thing, is it our community thing? And it's just a really gentle reminder to be like, how our capacity is so limited, how do we direct that capacity?
Yeah. Again, great segue. Yeah, if you can't tell, Ruth and I have many a conversation. But so, okay, we recently went through a multi-year budget process, and as someone who is a part of that FCG community, it really felt like you leaned into strategic advocacy approaches to share London's art community's needs. Can you share a little bit about how you developed that approach? And, as an organization that has been rooted in advocacy, was it different this time around? I'm just curious about that process.
It felt different. It definitely felt different. Even before the multi-year budget, we put out a ceasefire statement, and we got really great feedback on that. And it also led to really important conversations from the board of, great, we can make these statements, but we should also be really thoughtful about attending to our local community concerns, whatever they may be. And if we're putting out these international statements or internationally focused statements, how come we're not doing it locally? And that meant that right away this multi-year budget should be really important to us. We learned a lot. And it's not I'm not just trying to plug, but I think for us being part of the Pillar Nonprofit Network, it gave us a lot of good language, and it also just gave us that boost in confidence to be a nonprofit that advocates. And we were having those conversations with community members, and it was a really relatable series of conversations where, like us, like myself, like the board, we'd never really navigated a multi-year budget before, so we were like, interesting, okay. Yeah. A lot of things that we assumed were incorrect, and fielding the feelings of our community members, it made it all the more important to have that conversation and to push that advocacy message out.
Yeah. I mean, we had Paul on the podcast in the past, and it's heartening to hear that the work that we did together was beneficial in that way, because that really is, going back to the conversations with Paul, there has historically been that chill around advocacy for nonprofit and charitable organizations, because it was actually a part of, there were limitations around that in the past, and that has been removed, but that chill still exists. So how do we kind of support folks in really understanding, you are able to advocate, and you are able to show up and really speak to the concerns that you have and the changes that you want to see. And it can be a really daunting and overwhelming task, particularly when you don't have someone like Policy Paul, who is, that's his role, but rather it is yourself as a part-time employee of an artist-run center who's, navigating advocacy as well as running programming.
Yeah, I think something that comes up too with a lot of artists and cultural workers is one of the immediate kind of criticisms they might receive from someone not in the arts is, but you're an artist, and so why are you doing this? And we've even heard from people who are like, why are you getting so political? That's not what art is about. And what I tell my students is, if you decide that you're going to be apolitical, that is a political decision.
Yeah.
And artists, I've mentioned we have this history of artist activists in our community, but artists are also tapped in. Everyone's living on social media, and I think they just kind of need to be able to hear from other artists that, no, you are okay to articulate your concerns. You are a citizen, and however you express that, whether it's through art or through signing up on a signature campaign or writing your representative, you are able to do that.
Yeah.
And you should do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And this goes into a different conversation around the value and necessity of art in our communities and in our culture. But art plays such a fundamental role of finding different avenues to be able to communicate what our society is experiencing, and that is inherently political. Everything that we do as people existing in a world is political, and art has always been rooted in conversation, communication, and politics. even when it's something that's like lighthearted and it's often still commentary. Yeah, exactly. Like a delightful T-shirt that speaks to, different venues in the city that are no longer existing.
Yeah.
It still speaks to something around our community and the places in which we exist. So, all of it just to say, yay arts.
Yay arts. Really necessary right now.
Yeah.
I think also something that happened during this whole budget process is a few artists, including Elena and Misha, came in and had conversations, and Misha and Elena in particular were talking through a kind of expectation that art, the creative impulse is ingrained and it's going to happen no matter what. So basically, even when it doesn't get supported, don't worry, because the artists will still keep creating, and that feeds into this long-standing narrative of the starving artist and the suffering artist.
Yes.
And it's I think, a mindset that we have to recalibrate.
Yeah.
Because why can't it be a both and? Why can't we support these arts and artistic endeavors? And like part of our advocacy was being in conversation with the London Arts Council, with Museum London, with the Grand, and being people who use the library, and that's all interconnected.
Yeah. 2 points on that. So for folks who are unfamiliar, Elena runs a business and art practice called Soft Flirt, which is where Ruth's T-shirt is from. And the wonderful Misha Bauer, who I believe I mentioned in the past, is an incredible musician as well as writer, and one of her books is stacked there. She's phenomenal. You should check her out too. But going back to that piece around, like, artists will always create art. I feel like that is so closely connected to the narrative around the care economy sector and like nonprofits and impact sector around. They will continue to do it because it needs to happen. And so, fund them or not, they will continue to do that work to the detriment of whatever it might be, whether it's people or the organizations themselves. And that is something that needs to change, because, to care for the people who are doing the work, artists or folks in the nonprofit sector, folks in the impact sector, and to really recognize where a lot of those like lived expertise and perspectives are coming from. It means supporting people who are coming from equity seeking and equity deserving communities. And so they need to be supported in order to sustain them, to make better communities and to make a better nonprofit sector, to create a better arts and culture sector, because it's more than just tourism, and tourism is a big part of it, and so is that, the foundation and the fabric of it is the artists that exist within the community, and I think that's such an incredible point around the notion of the overworked nonprofit sector or nonprofit worker and the starving artist. Like, how do we rewrite that narrative? Because I think it's really important that we do.
I think it's absolutely necessary that we do. And I mean, to our point, again, to our position, I think in the last 12 years, myself included, we've had 5 directors, because it is a part-time position and the pay is not that great. And as much, every single director has been incredible and has worked tirelessly, and a couple came from away to be here. And it's just when you don't have the funding to sustain that one staff person, they inevitably have to move on. And then suddenly your organization, which is dependent on that one staff person, is set back a significant space. And so it's kind of I keep calling it a catch-22 or a hamster wheel. Like you get stuck, and then that rebuilding takes time and capacity. And, it means that we can't break out of, or we fall through the cracks, whatever metaphor you want to use.
Yeah. We often have the conversation in the nonprofit sector around, succession planning and like legacy planning, and also like positive redundancy. Like, how can you have those things baked in where it's not one person doing the one job that only they can do, but rather there's funding and support and acknowledgement of the work and emotional work that goes into a lot of this, very care-focused work that happens. Even just thinking about folks who are supporting the health and homelessness endeavors in the city, making sure that they are supported so that they can continue in the work. And then, we're not constantly needing to refill those roles, have folks get caught up, understand the process and the system, and then leaving in 3 years when the funding cycle's up and when their contracts end and all of those things. It is a systemic issue that needs to be addressed, and one that I am hopeful there's more conversation around, because it really does benefit everyone involved, not just the organizations, but the community, as well as the funders themselves, to truly have, focusing in on how can we achieve the best outcomes, is around that, positive leadership development, and that includes all levels of staff within an organization.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So kind of going back to that advocacy piece around the multi-year budget process, you touched on this a little bit, but what would you say have been some of the key learnings around the way that you advocated this time around through that budget process?
I mean, to your earlier point, we were in a moment that felt like we all wanted to react. We were really conscious that we did have to check in with our membership. So in doing that, we also wanted to give them all the information we could give them as we were learning in real time. And so we communicated to them through our membership newsletter. We outlined what our concerns were as an organization, but we also said, you probably have concerns as well. We would like to prepare a package which articulates our concerns. We're concerned on behalf of not only our organization, but the London Arts Council, for example. They are a funder of ours. And being an artist-run center and scrappy and advocacy-driven, we can be, I think, a bit more critical than other spaces can. And so we wanted to see how our membership felt, and we got a really big response. And not only from membership, but when we started to put the word out on social media, we got a lot of great tidbits and statements from people. And we found it really revelatory that a number of people felt like their statements had to be anonymous. So it gave us a really good temperature for the community of like, okay, this is how people are feeling, but there's still a lot of hesitancy to speak out. And I can understand that. I think we were also, as an organization, not doing our best to reach out to our city council members. And so this was a really good opportunity to do that and to have these conversations. And I will commend a couple of councilors who came by, gave us a lot of time. And some of the conversation was really fruitful. Some was really frustrating, but we are learning in real time how to connect with people who I think have a great deal of influence in a way that we haven't done before. And I think our membership and our community, they're seeing that, and again, we're all learning in real time that we can all do this individually, but having an organization do that is a good, empowering thing.
Yeah. I'm curious, you spoke to having those conversations with people that you haven't necessarily in the past, specifically counselors. Are there any kind of key takeaways or tips that you feel like you could share with another organization, arts or otherwise, that maybe wants to do the same thing, for how you were able to get those conversations going?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. From our perspective, we just let them know who we were and who we represented. And we used concrete numbers to say, this is how many people we represent. We also, when we brought our concerns to them, tried to make them as concrete as possible, because again, it can be really easy to assume that the arts are a good to have, nice to have, not a need to have. And so we wanted to come to them with some statistics, with some concrete statements, with some comparisons of, here's how much this funding, here's how far it would go for an organization like us or a Museum London or a library. For a minute there, it looked like we were going to lose our library in Ward 4, which is where we are. And so we were able to articulate that and talk about community members who really rely on that space. And so being really concrete, being obviously warm and receptive, it can be hard in a moment where it just feels like you are not getting perhaps the care and respect that you would like. But you can have a good conversation with anyone. You truly can, as long as it's like, okay, we're both concerned about some of the same things.
Yeah.
So let's see where we can find that shared concern.
Yeah, I think that speaks to a good point of like meeting folks where they're at in all the different ways that means, as well as that piece around, okay, like what do we share? Like what are those shared outcomes and goals that we have? And like, let's connect on that and how do we move that forward?
Exactly.
Because I think also one thing that I was really, that I really admired about some of the work that you did was, you know, the piece around, okay, well, this is what's been said in the past, and here how that hasn't moved forward, or, you know, the conversation of like maybe like the next budget year cycle, or, you know, the arts have always been funded, and the proof to show that that hasn't actually been the case with the data and fact that can't be disputed. It's not rooted, you know, there's a time and a place always for that heart-centered and emotional piece always, and being able to, you know, have that connection to the fact as well is that tangible data is useful.
Yeah, that data was a community member too. Like we didn't organize that, but somebody came in for these concerned conversations, like these really safe one-on-ones, and his name is Dave, and he said he had shared that with city councilors. He'd shared that with a lot of people, and then when I chatted with them one-on-one, they said, "Oh, I didn't see that." So it's like, let me share it again.
Yeah.
So the work is really truly being done collectively.
Yeah.
But if we have that one-on-one conversation, then we get to push that citizens' really valuable research.
Amazing. Okay, so before we kind of wrap things up, where can folks find out more about you, Forest City Gallery, and the work that you're doing?
Yeah, we have a website. It's www.forestcitygallery.com. We have a public newsletter. Anybody can sign up. We are on social media. We're on Instagram and Facebook. We came out of Twitter retirement for this. We might not stay on Twitter for all the reasons, but you can find us on social media at forestcitygallery.com. And obviously, we're at 1025 Elias, right next door to Odyssey Records. We're open Wednesday to Saturday, so just come on in the door. I'll be there. Come talk to me.
Yeah. Amazing. Ruth, thanks so much for being here. It's nice to have a conversation always. And, you know, normally they're sitting outside of Forest City Gallery, which is lovely. And it's nice to have them here, too.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you once again to Ruth for coming and joining us and chatting all things arts and advocacy. If you'd like to learn more about Forest City Gallery or become a member, head on over to forestcitygallery.com. Be sure to also stop by the gallery itself to take in one of the many incredible exhibits curated by the FCG team. If you'd like to learn more about Pillar Nonprofit Network and the work being done here, you can head on over to pillarnonprofit.ca. If you're interested in policy and advocacy efforts in the nonprofit sector, be sure to keep an eye out for our #PolicyTalk events, which are hosted by my colleague Paul, and those dive into this very topic around advocacy in the impact sector. You can also find information on our learning and development offerings, as well as volunteer and job opportunities with organizations in our network. Once again, I am your host, your guide, your business bud, Miriam Waligi, and this has been Pollinating Purpose, a caring approach to business by Pillar Nonprofit Network. Thank you for coming along for the ride. I'm happy that you're here.